The rain was coming down hard on the empty highway outside of Phoenix, Arizona, turning the asphalt into a dark mirror that reflected the weak headlights of a worn-out pickup truck. Inside the vehicle, Daniel Carter gripped the steering wheel with tired hands, his eyes heavy after another 14-hour shift at a construction site. He was thinking only about getting home to his daughter when a sudden figure appeared on the road, collapsing right in front of his truck. He slammed the brakes just in time, his heart nearly stopping, unaware that this single second would shatter everything he thought he knew about his future. Daniel stepped out into the rain, his boots sinking into the mud at the edge of the road, and saw a woman lying unconscious, her clothes soaked, her breathing shallow. She looked completely out of place for that deserted road. Clean, well-dressed, not a homeless drifter, not a hitchhiker. For a brief second, he hesitated, fear crawling up his spine as 1,000 warnings echoed in his mind. But something in her fragile stillness froze him in place, as if fate itself dared him to choose. And in that frozen moment, destiny quietly changed direction as he leaned closer. Daniel noticed a faint cut on her temple, blood mixing with rainwater. No purse, no phone, no clues, just a stranger abandoned by the night. He whispered, asking if she could hear him, but her lips barely trembled. A passing truck roared by without slowing down, spraying water over both of them, as if the world itself refused to notice what was happening. Daniel felt utterly alone in that decision, not knowing that powerful people were already searching desperately for this very woman. With shaking arms, he lifted her into the passenger seat of his truck. Her body was light, almost too light, and her skin felt cold against his calloused hands. The moment he closed the door, his dashboard lights flickered oddly, as if his truck sensed something unnatural had just entered his life. He stared at her for a second longer than necessary, fighting a strange sensation in his chest, fear mixed with an unexplainable pull. But he had no idea that helping her would drag him into a world of wealth, danger, and betrayal beyond his imagination. Daniel rushed toward the nearest hospital, his old engine screaming in protest as he pushed it past its limits. Each red light felt like a curse, each mile a gamble. The woman moaned softly once, just enough to prove she was still alive, and that sound cut through him like a silent plea for survival. He told himself he was doing the right thing, yet a quiet voice deep inside whispered that nothing about this night was random anymore. Inside the emergency room, nurses rushed her away while Daniel stood soaked in the corner, unnoticed, trembling, unsure if he was about to be thanked or accused of something terrible. When a doctor finally approached him with urgent questions, Daniel realized he knew absolutely nothing about the woman whose life he had just placed in his hands. Not her name, not her story, not the danger following her like a shadow in the dark. While paperwork was being filled out, a black luxury SUV stopped abruptly across the street from the hospital. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the building with cold, calculating eyes. One of them spoke quietly into an earpiece, confirming they had found the location. Daniel, unaware, sat on a plastic chair praying silently that the woman would survive. But forces far beyond him were already positioning themselves around that very room. As hours passed and the storm outside calmed, the doctor returned with news that the woman was stable but unconscious. Daniel felt relief wash over him, thinking his role in this strange night was over. But at that exact moment, the suited men entered the hospital lobby, their gaze locking onto him with unsettling precision. And without knowing why, Daniel felt pure danger crawl under his skin. Before that night, Daniel Carter's life was painfully predictable. Each morning before sunrise, he woke up in a tiny rented house on the outskirts of Phoenix, where the air always smelled faintly of dust and gasoline. He prepared a simple breakfast while his 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, got ready for school in silence, used to the routine of a father who was always exhausted but never absent. He worked construction 6 days a week, sometimes 7, carrying bricks, pouring concrete, and swallowing painkillers to survive the long shifts that barely paid the bills. Money was always short, no matter how carefully he planned. Every month felt like a fight between electricity, rent, food, and medicine. Daniel learned to skip meals without complaining, making sure Lucy never noticed when he pretended he wasn't hungry. He smiled through fatigue, hid his empty pockets behind cheap jokes, and told himself things would get better someday. But deep inside, he feared that someday was just a comforting lie. After work, Daniel rushed to pick Lucy up from her neighbor's house, where she stayed while he worked late. She always ran into his arms with a bright smile that erased part of his pain for a few seconds. They ate simple dinners, macaroni, canned soup, cheap chicken, always together at the small kitchen table. Daniel listened to Lucy talk about school while quietly calculating whether the gas in his truck would last until payday. At night, after Lucy fell asleep, Daniel often sat on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe, afraid of failing her in ways his own father had failed him. The walls of their house were thin, the heat unreliable, and the silence heavy with worries he never spoke out loud. He carried guilt like a second skin, blaming himself for every limitation Lucy faced. And still, she believed he was the strongest man in the world. Sometimes, when money ran dangerously low, Daniel did extra jobs, fixing fences, unloading deliveries, washing cars under the brutal Arizona sun. His hands were always cracked, his back always aching, but he refused to complain. Pride and desperation walked side by side in his life. He had learned that nobody saved people like him. People like him only survived if they kept moving. Every Sunday, Daniel took Lucy to a small park near their neighborhood. They sat on worn-out benches and shared dollar ice creams while he watched families who seemed to live in a different universe. Clean cars, carefree laughter, expensive clothes. Lucy never asked why their life was different. She had learned early not to question the unfairness of the world, which only made Daniel's heart ache even more. Despite everything, Daniel never crossed certain lines. He refused shady offers at job sites, ignored fast money schemes, and stayed painfully honest in a world where dishonesty seemed easier. His coworkers often mocked him for being too good for his own survival. But he feared becoming someone Lucy wouldn't recognize. That fear guided every decision he made, even when those decisions cost him more than he could afford. That night on the highway, Daniel believed he was just another exhausted man heading back to his broken little world. He had no dreams of heroism, no illusions of fate. He only wanted to tuck his daughter into bed and rest his aching body. But he had no idea that in a matter of minutes, his routine would collapse forever. Daniel never spoke about Lucy's mother. The subject was a quiet ghost that walked through every room of their house without being invited. Years earlier, Emily Carter had walked out one ordinary afternoon, leaving a note on the kitchen table and a life full of unanswered questions. Daniel remembered the exact position of the chair she left behind, slightly pulled out, as if she planned to return any minute. She never did. At first, Daniel begged for explanations. He called her phone until the battery died, searched through mutual friends, even drove to her childhood home in California. Nobody had real answers. Some whispered about another man. Others claimed she wanted more from life, but none of those reasons softened the wound. What hurt most wasn't that she left. It was that she chose to leave Lucy behind without even saying goodbye. The first months after Emily disappeared were a blur of mistakes, exhaustion, and grief. Daniel forgot meals, missed workdays, and struggled to understand how to raise a baby by himself. Lucy cried through the nights, reaching for a mother who would never answer again. And Daniel, standing over her crib, learned what true helplessness felt like for the first time in his life. Some nights, even years later, Daniel still dreamed of Emily knocking on the door, apologizing, saying it was all a terrible mistake. He would wake up before she finished her sentence, his heart racing, his hands empty. Every unanswered question turned into a silent accusation against his own worth. He wondered endlessly if he had failed her long before she failed him. Guilt became his quiet companion. Guilt for not seeing the signs. Guilt for trusting too easily. Guilt for not being enough. And worst of all, guilt for the part of him that still missed her. Daniel told himself over and over that he hated her, but hatred would have been easier than the unresolved ache he carried inside. Lucy grew up hearing a carefully edited version of the truth. To her, her mother was simply someone who had to go far away for reasons too complicated to explain. Daniel promised himself he would never poison her heart with resentment. But each time Lucy asked when her mom would come back, his chest tightened in a way words could never fully describe. Those wounds shaped Daniel's fear of loss more than he ever admitted. He avoided emotional risks because he knew exactly how destruction felt. He built walls so quietly that even he didn't notice when they became permanent. Helping people felt dangerous. Trusting strangers felt stupid. And yet, on that rain-soaked highway, all those instincts would soon be tested without mercy. As he waited at the hospital for news about the unconscious woman, memories of Emily haunted him with cruel timing. Another woman, another unknown fate, another thread of uncertainty tightening around his heart. Daniel felt as if life was whispering the same question again. How much more are you willing to lose? The following morning, Daniel woke up with the uneasy sensation that the night before had not ended properly. The rain had stopped, but the weight in his chest had only grown heavier. As he prepared Lucy's breakfast, his hands trembled slightly while pouring the milk, his mind replaying the image of the unconscious woman over and over. He told himself it was nothing more than adrenaline. Still, the air inside the house felt different, as if something invisible had followed him home. Quietly waiting on his way to work, Daniel noticed two black vehicles parked near the entrance of his street. At first, he thought they belonged to new neighbors or some delivery company. But as he passed them, he caught the brief reflection of his own face in their tinted windows, and the reflection of someone sitting inside, watching him. The engine of one vehicle started the moment he drove past. His heart skipped, but logic dismissed his fear as paranoia. At the construction site, his tools slipped more than usual, his concentration fractured. His coworkers joked that he looked like he had seen a ghost. Daniel forced a laugh, refusing to share the truth of the hospital, the rain, the woman. He felt an irrational need to keep it to himself. Every instinct told him that speaking about it would somehow make things worse, as if words alone could summon trouble faster. During lunch break, Daniel checked his phone instinctively, half expecting a message from someone he did not even know. Of course, there was nothing. Just unpaid bill reminders, spam offers, and one voice message from Lucy's school about an upcoming parent meeting. Real life continued as normal, yet he could not shake the feeling that he was standing in the quiet space between two storms. That afternoon, a man in an expensive suit appeared briefly at the edge of the construction site, speaking with the foreman in low tones. Daniel barely noticed at first, until the man slowly turned and looked directly at him. Their eyes met for no more than 2 seconds, but something in that gaze sent a warning through Daniel's spine. The man nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself, then walked away. Daniel's foreman returned looking unsettled. He barked orders harder than usual and avoided eye contact. When Daniel asked casually who the visitor was, the foreman shrugged and said it was just some corporate inspection. But his voice lacked conviction. That lie sat heavily between them, like a loaded weapon no one wanted to touch. By the time Daniel picked up Lucy that evening, a strange tension followed him like a second shadow. Lucy chattered happily about her drawings and her best friend at school. Unaware that her father's thoughts were spiraling into danger he could not explain. He smiled for her, but inside, a quiet alarm refused to shut off no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. That night, after Lucy fell asleep, Daniel stood by the window for a long time, staring at the dark street. The same black vehicles from the morning were gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. He told himself he was imagining things. Yet deep down, he sensed something had already started moving toward him. Slowly and with purpose. 2 days later, Daniel received a call from the hospital while he was pouring concrete under the brutal Arizona sun. The nurse's voice was calm but firm. The woman he had brought in had regained consciousness. She was asking for him specifically. Daniel felt his stomach tighten immediately. He hadn't even left his full name that night. The fact that she knew how to reach him didn't make sense, and that made it dangerous. He arrived at the hospital after work, still covered in dust and sweat, feeling painfully out of place among polished floors and quiet hallways. The nurse guided him to a private room unlike the crowded emergency ward he remembered. Inside, the woman sat upright in bed, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her posture composed despite the faint bruising on her face. The moment she saw him, her eyes filled with something between relief and fear. She thanked him softly, her voice steady but emotionally fragile. Daniel nodded awkwardly, unsure what to say. He hadn't expected her to be so calm, so articulate, so different. She introduced herself as Claire. No last name, no background, just a name offered like a carefully controlled secret. When he asked what had happened to her on the road, her expression darkened instantly. Claire said she couldn't fully remember how she ended up there. Head trauma, shock, confusion. Those were her explanations. Yet Daniel noticed how selective her memory seemed to be. She remembered his face, his truck, the rain, the hospital lights, but she could not or would not explain why she had been alone on a deserted highway at night. The gaps in her story echoed louder than the parts she spoke. Their conversation was interrupted when two men in suits appeared at the doorway. The same cold eyes Daniel had seen in the hospital lobby that night. Claire's entire body stiffened the moment she saw them. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. One of the men smiled politely at Daniel, thanking him for assisting a family friend. The phrase sounded rehearsed, and Claire did not correct him. The men insisted they would take care of everything from here. They offered to pay Daniel for his help immediately. The amount they named was more than his monthly salary. Daniel felt insulted and confused at the same time. He refused quickly, saying he didn't help her for money. The men exchanged glances, their polite smiles fading just enough to reveal something colder underneath. Before leaving, Claire looked directly into Daniel's eyes and whispered, "Please be careful." The words sounded misplaced, almost prophetic. Daniel wanted to ask her what she meant, but the men were already guiding her out of the room with gentle force disguised as protection. The moment the door closed, Daniel felt as if a door inside his life had closed with it. He walked back through the hospital lobby alone. Daniel realized something deeply unsettling. The world had acknowledged what he did on that road. Powerful people now knew his face. And whatever Claire was running from, it hadn't stopped chasing her just because she survived. That same night, as Daniel tucked Lucy into bed, she asked him an innocent question that cut deeper than she could have known. "Daddy, do you help everyone?" Daniel froze for a second, brushing her hair gently. He told her he tried to, but inside, his mind reeled with the truth. Helping had already dragged him too close to something that felt far beyond his control. After Lucy fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the small stack of unpaid bills on the table. He replayed Claire's warning in his mind. Please be careful. Careful of what? Of whom? He felt torn between his nature and his fear. Every instinct now told him to stay out of whatever world she belonged to, even if it meant turning his back completely. The following day, a delivery arrived at his door. An expensive gift basket with gourmet food, luxury chocolates, and a card with no signature, only a simple message: "Thank you for your kindness." Daniel's first reaction was anger, not gratitude. It felt like a silent attempt to keep him quiet, to buy his silence with things he could never normally afford. Later that afternoon, one of the suited men appeared at Lucy's school during pickup time. From a distance, Daniel watched him speak calmly with a staff member before turning his attention toward Daniel. He approached with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said their gratitude was sincere, but Daniel should focus on his own life and let them handle Claire's affairs from now on. The implication was clear without being spoken aloud. This was a warning disguised as courtesy. Daniel's chest tightened as images of Lucy flickered through his thoughts. For the first time, fear was no longer only about himself. It was about how easily his fragile little world could be crushed without notice. That night, Daniel made the decision to stay away. If Claire needed help, surely she had people, resources, money, things Daniel had never possessed. He convinced himself that stepping back was not cowardice but responsibility. He owed Lucy safety, not heroics. And yet, the thought of abandoning someone he had already saved once ate away at his conscience like acid. Days passed with disturbing normality. No more messages, no more visits, no black vehicles on his street. Life seemed to quietly reset itself. Daniel almost began to believe the danger was over. But peace felt unnatural now. Too clean, too sudden, like the silence before something catastrophic. On the fifth night, as Daniel locked his front door and turned off the lights, his phone vibrated with an unknown number. The message contained only 3 words: "They found me." And in that instant, he knew his resistance was about to be tested in ways he could never escape. Daniel stared at the glowing screen of his phone in the dark kitchen, rereading the 3 words over and over. "They found me." The message felt heavier than its size, like a silent scream trapped inside a digital whisper. His first instinct was to delete it, to pretend it never existed, to crawl back into the fragile illusion of safety he had been clinging to for days. But his heart betrayed him before his mind could fully decide, because deep down, he already knew there was no one seeing that message now. He paced the narrow living room, careful not to wake Lucy, his steps slow and anxious on the worn-out floor. Every logical thought screamed at him to stay out of it. He had a child to protect, a life balanced on the edge of survival. Yet another voice, older and louder than fear, reminded him of the woman unconscious in the rain, abandoned on a dark road by forces powerful enough to erase her without leaving a trace. Daniel typed and erased at least 5 different responses. "Call the police. Stay hidden. I can't help anymore." Each message felt like a betrayal of the man he believed himself to be. Finally, with trembling fingers, he wrote only one sentence. "Where are you?" The moment he pressed send, a cold certainty settled into his chest. He had just stepped back into the fire he had tried so desperately to escape. The reply came almost instantly with a location pin dropped in an industrial zone south of Phoenix, near abandoned warehouses and closed factories. A place known among locals for being forgotten by law enforcement and remembered only by those with nothing to lose. Daniel's heart pounded harder with every second he stared at that red glowing on the map. As if the phone itself was pulling him toward danger, he walked into Lucy's room and knelt beside her bed, watching her sleep with a tenderness mixed with fear so sharp it nearly broke him. He whispered apologies she couldn't hear and promises he wasn't sure he could keep. That moment alone almost convinced him to turn back. But guilt and responsibility collided inside him in a way that left no safe choice behind. Daniel left a note on the kitchen table for Lucy, telling her he had gone out briefly and would be back before morning. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but he told himself it was temporary, necessary. He grabbed his jacket, his phone, and his old truck keys, feeling as if he were suiting up for a battle he was guaranteed to lose. The drive through the sleeping city felt unnaturally silent. Streetlights passed like slow, yellow witnesses to his choice. With every mile, the fear grew louder, but so did his determination. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't brave. He was simply a man who couldn't live with himself if he turned away now as the warehouses appeared in the distance like massive shadows crouched against the horizon. Daniel realized the truth he had been avoiding. This decision would mark his life forever. No matter how the night ended, Daniel found Claire hiding inside a half-collapsed warehouse, sitting among broken pallets and rusted metal, her face pale under the dim glow of a single emergency light. The moment she saw him, relief and fear crashed together in her eyes. She stood quickly, scanning the darkness behind him as if expecting someone to burst through the walls at any second. Her entire body trembled with the exhaustion of someone who had been running far too long. Before Daniel could ask anything, headlights flared outside the building. 2 vehicles. The sound of doors slamming echoed through the empty space like gunshots. Claire's breath hitched. "They tracked my phone," she whispered, horror flooding her voice. Panic surged through Daniel, raw and immediate. He had walked straight into a trap without even realizing it. They ran through a side exit just as men flooded in through the front. Shouting exploded behind them, footsteps pounding against concrete. Daniel grabbed Claire's hand and pulled her toward his truck, parked illegally in the shadows. As bullets struck metal behind them, the world became noise, chaos, and instinct. Daniel had never run for his life like that before. They barely escaped, tires screaming as Daniel slammed on the gas, weaving blindly through alleys and backstreets he barely knew. Claire crouched low in the seat, blood trickling again from her reopened wound. Daniel's hands shook violently on the steering wheel. He realized then that this wasn't intimidation anymore. This was a hunt. Minutes later, a police siren wailed nearby, not chasing the attackers but chasing Daniel. One of the suited men had already flipped the narrative. The police ordered him to pull over, weapons drawn. Claire begged him not to stop, but with Lucy's face burning in his mind, Daniel chose to obey. They were arrested on the spot. Daniel was accused of kidnapping, reckless endangerment, and resisting arrest. Claire was taken away separately without explanation. Daniel's protests meant nothing. His words dissolved under the weight of fabricated authority and planted evidence he never saw coming. Sitting in a cold interrogation room hours later, bruised and shaking, Daniel realized the terrifying truth. Helping Claire hadn't just put him in danger. It had officially turned his life into a battlefield controlled by people who played by rules he didn't even know existed. And as the door opened and an officer announced new, more serious charges, Daniel understood that this was only the beginning of his punishment. Daniel was released on bail 2 days later, thanks only to a public defender who barely had time to skim his case. The charges were absurd, yet terrifyingly real. The accusations painted him not as a desperate father, but as a calculated criminal. The media caught wind of the story within hours. Headlines twisted the truth with ruthless efficiency, and his face appeared on local news as a suspected accomplice to a dangerous fugitive. When he arrived home, his front door was already marked with a legal notice. Eviction. Immediate. The landlord had seen the news and refused to risk keeping a criminal on the property. Lucy stood behind the door holding her backpack, confused and frightened, while neighbors whispered from behind half-closed curtains. Daniel's heart broke quietly as his world began to unravel in front of his eyes. At Lucy's school, administrators informed him that social services were reviewing his custody rights pending investigation. Every word sounded like a death sentence spoken in polite language. Lucy clutched his hand, afraid and silent, while adults discussed her future as if Daniel were already erased from it. Daniel's job site cleared out his locker the same afternoon. The foreman refused to meet his eyes, claiming corporate orders. Years of sweat and loyalty vanished in a single cold decision. Daniel stood in the parking lot holding a small box of tools, realizing he had lost not only his income, but his place in the only life he knew. That night, they slept in the truck. Lucy asked if it was an adventure. Daniel forced a smile and said yes. Inside, shame crushed him. He had tried to do the right thing, and now everything he loved was paying the price for it. Bills piled up faster than he could even open them. Court dates loomed. Social workers called. Journalists circled. And through it all, Claire had vanished without a trace. No messages. No answers. No proof that she was even alive. Alone under the cold glow of a street lamp, Daniel finally broke down in silence while Lucy slept against his chest in the passenger seat. He had never felt so powerless, so betrayed by the simple act of trying to be human. And far away in a place he could not reach, forces far richer and deadlier than his worst fears were quietly preparing the next move against him. The courthouse in downtown Phoenix overflowed with reporters the morning of Daniel's first hearing. Cameras flashed as if a celebrity were arriving, but instead it was a broken man stepping out of an old truck with his daughter's small backpack slung over his shoulder. Lucy walked beside him, holding his hand tightly, confused by the sudden attention. Microphones were pushed toward his face, questions shouted with reckless cruelty, and every word twisted the knife deeper into his already bleeding reputation. Inside the courtroom, Daniel felt smaller than he ever had in his life. The prosecutor painted him as a manipulator, a criminal hiding behind the mask of a struggling single father. Screens displayed carefully edited footage from security cameras, distorted timelines, and manufactured connections that made him look like a willing accomplice. Each lie landed like a hammer blow, and Daniel realized the truth no longer mattered in this arena. The judge denied his request to keep Lucy present during the session, citing her emotional protection. Social services escorted her out as she cried and reached for him, her small voice calling his name in panic. Daniel's knees nearly gave in as the courtroom doors closed between them. The sound echoed like a permanent separation, and something inside him cracked that would never fully heal. When the hearing ended, Daniel was released again under strict conditions, but the damage was already irreversible. Outside, footage of his supposed crimes was replayed live on multiple news channels. Commentators debated his guilt as if he were already convicted. Strangers screamed insults, threw water bottles, and accused him of being a monster. He kept his head down, fighting the urge to disappear into the pavement. That afternoon, social services placed Lucy temporarily with a foster family for her safety. Daniel was not allowed to contest the decision immediately. The moment he watched her walk away holding another adult's hand, his chest felt like it collapsed inward. The last piece of his world was being carefully extracted under the pretense of protection. Alone again, Daniel returned to the truck that now served as his only shelter. Messages poured into his phone, some threatening, others mocking. Old friends stopped answering. Former coworkers blocked him. The humiliation was total, public, and merciless. His identity was being rewritten by people who had never met him. That night, sitting in the driver's seat with no destination and no one beside him, Daniel finally understood that the punishment was no longer about the alleged crime. It was about crushing him completely, about making him invisible, isolated, and weak enough to break without resistance. And deep in his heart, a terrifying question began to grow louder with every breath. How far would they go to make sure he never stood back up? 3 nights later, while Daniel slept in an abandoned gas station parking lot, a soft knock tapped against his window. His heart leaped into his throat instantly. For a split second, he believed the suited men had finally come to finish what they started. But when he looked up, he saw a woman standing under the flickering streetlight, her face calm, her posture controlled, her presence impossible to ignore. She introduced herself as Margaret Holloway. Her voice was calm, elegant, completely out of place for the derelict surroundings. She knew his full name. She knew Lucy's location. She knew the exact charges against him, details that had not yet been made public. Daniel instinctively reached for the door handle, but her next words froze him in place. "I'm here because Claire is still alive." Margaret explained that she represented people who preferred to remain invisible. Investors, families, power structures that moved money and destinies quietly. She claimed she was not aligned with the men hunting Claire, nor with law enforcement. She belonged to a third layer of the world, one that watched silently until it decided to intervene. Daniel didn't want to trust her. Every instinct screamed that she was another trap. Yet the way she spoke about Claire, with urgency but not threat, confused him deeply. She showed him a photo taken just hours earlier of Claire in a secured medical facility. Guarded, but alive. The relief that flooded Daniel was immediately drowned by a deeper fear of what that meant. Margaret offered him something no one else had since this nightmare began. Information. But information came with conditions. Daniel would have to remain available. Observe. Listen. And above all, survive. She didn't promise to clear his name. She only promised that the truth would eventually surface, if he didn't die or disappear first. When Daniel asked why she was helping him at all, Margaret hesitated for the first time. She said only that some debts outlive the people who create them. Some mistakes echo for generations. And sometimes, a single act of kindness forces consequences no one expected to revisit. Before leaving, she placed a prepaid phone in his hand. "Use this only if everything collapses even further," she said calmly. Then she added, "And it will." Her certainty chilled him more than any direct threat ever could as Margaret walked back into the darkness and vanished without sound. Daniel realized that the game around him had just grown far larger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The following days became an exhausting blur of legal documents, unanswered questions, and constant surveillance Daniel could not prove but felt at every corner. Sometimes he would see the same car twice in different neighborhoods. Sometimes his new prepaid phone would light up without receiving calls. Every silence now felt louder than noise, and every coincidence felt carefully designed. Margaret's information contradicted everything the police claimed. Claire was alive but officially listed as missing. Daniel was accused of assault, yet Claire had never filed a report. Witnesses had appeared out of nowhere. Evidence surfaced without clear origin. It was as if reality itself was being rearranged in real time depending on who held the pen. Daniel tried to focus on regaining Lucy, attending every required meeting, obeying every restriction, despite the humiliation. The foster family reported that Lucy cried herself to sleep every night calling his name. Each update cut into him like broken glass. Yet he was powerless to change anything with the truth still buried under layers of constructed lies. One afternoon, Daniel found his truck vandalized with red paint across the doors. Kidnapper. The message spread online within hours. His photo circulated again. Threats escalated. Someone even left a dead animal near the truck as a warning. Whoever controlled the narrative was now controlling the mob. Margaret reached out only once during that period. Her message was brief. They are accelerating. No explanation followed. No instructions. Just a warning that danger was no longer patient. Daniel began to wonder whether Claire herself had become a symbol rather than a person. A piece on a board moved by hands he could not see. And the most terrifying realization of all was that he, too, was now just another piece, sacrificable if necessary. Late one night, his prepaid phone rang for the first time. The number was masked. The voice on the other end was distorted and trembling. It said only, "You don't know who she is, and that's why they can't let you live." The line went dead immediately after. Daniel sat frozen in the darkness, realizing that the confusion was no longer accidental. It was the weapon being used to dismantle his mind, one unanswered truth at a time. For the first time in weeks, Daniel received news that sounded almost like hope. His public defender called early one morning with unexpected updates. Several charges against him were being temporarily suspended due to inconsistencies in witness testimonies. The tone of the call was cautious but optimistic. For a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to breathe without feeling like the air was poisoned. Later that day, social services agreed to supervised visits with Lucy. When Daniel saw her again in the sterile room of a government building, she ran into his arms with a desperation that nearly broke him in half. He fought to hold back tears as she sobbed against his chest, asking in a trembling voice if everything was finally going back to normal. Daniel lied gently and said yes. He told her Daddy just had to fix a few things first. Lucy smiled through red eyes and believed him with the kind of faith only children possess. That trust felt like both salvation and sentence at the same time. Margaret sent a short message that evening. Pressure is shifting. No explanation followed, but Daniel took it as a sign that the unseen gears were moving in his favor, at least temporarily. For the first time since the nightmare began, he slept for more than 2 consecutive hours. The vandalism around his truck stopped. Online attacks slowed. Even some former neighbors sent cautious messages of apology. It felt as if the wildfire of hatred had finally begun to cool. Daniel dared to imagine rebuilding from the ashes. He began searching for new work quietly, avoiding attention. A small warehouse offered him night shifts under the table. The pay was terrible, but to Daniel, it felt like dignity slowly returning in carefully measured drops. That night, while resting against the steering wheel during break, Daniel whispered Lucy's name and allowed himself to believe that perhaps the worst had passed. The darkness around him didn't feel as hostile as before, almost kind, almost forgiving. But as his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number reading, "Don't get comfortable," Daniel realized the relief he felt might be nothing more than bait. The following morning, just as Daniel prepared for another supervised visit with Lucy, police cars blocked his path outside the government building. Officers approached with rigid formality and placed him under arrest without explanation. Bystanders lifted their phones instantly. The nightmare had returned with a vengeance and no warning. This time, the charge was far more serious. Conspiracy tied to corporate espionage. The accusation made no sense to Daniel, but the evidence presented was overwhelming. Bank transfers in his name, location data placing him in restricted facilities, voice recordings that sounded disturbingly like him, fabricated perfection. The bail request was denied. Daniel was taken straight to county jail. As the cell door closed behind him with metallic finality, reality crashed over him in full force. This was no longer damage control. This was annihilation. News outlets exploded with the updated story. The innocent single-father narrative collapsed overnight and was replaced with headlines of betrayal, greed, and manipulation. Every platform declared him a mastermind instead of a victim. The speed at which the narrative flipped was terrifying. From his cell, Daniel learned that his parental rights were now under emergency review again. Lucy's visits were immediately suspended. His lawyer stopped returning calls. Even Margaret went silent. Every thread of support was being severed at once. Inside jail, other inmates recognized him from the news. Some mocked him. Others believed he had worked with powerful people. Both responses made him a target. Violence followed quickly and without provocation. Beaten and bleeding on a concrete floor one night, Daniel finally understood what true injustice felt like. Not as a concept, but as a physical weight pressing the air from his lungs. The system that was supposed to protect had become the weapon used against him. And as he stared at the cracked ceiling through swollen eyes, one thought echoed louder than pain itself. This time, they were trying to erase him permanently. Weeks passed inside county jail, and each day blurred into the next like a slow-motion collapse. Daniel lost track of time, light, and hope with equal inevitability. No visits, no updates, no answers. Only concrete walls and unanswered prayers. Through a guard's overheard conversation, Daniel learned that Lucy had been transferred to a different foster placement in another city due to security concerns. He wasn't told where. He wasn't allowed to ask. The worst part wasn't the separation, it was the uncertainty. His truck was seized as evidence. His personal belongings were cataloged and stripped away until he no longer recognized what remained of himself. Even the simplest fragments of his former life were being systematically erased. Daniel's public defender finally informed him that someone had impersonated him using advanced digital forgery. But without access to Claire, to financial servers, to surveillance records controlled by private corporations, no real defense could be mounted in time. Every potential ally pulled away. Witnesses retracted statements. Evidence disappeared from public access. Time moved forward like an executioner who never needed to hurry. At night, Daniel began talking to Lucy in his mind just to remain sane. He rehearsed apologies he might never get the chance to speak. He imagined her growing without him, believing the lies because no truth was allowed to reach her. On the day his final preliminary hearing was scheduled, his lawyer quietly told him that conviction was no longer a fear. It was the expected outcome. The word inevitable echoed in Daniel's head like a verdict already carved in stone as guards led him through the hallway toward what felt like the symbolic end of his existence. Daniel finally accepted the brutal truth. He had lost almost everything that ever made him human. The courtroom felt colder than the jail cell as Daniel stood in chains before the judge, his body weak, his spirit barely standing. The prosecutor spoke with confidence, presenting the case as if everything were already decided. Daniel listened in silence, no longer fighting every lie, no longer reacting to every distortion. Something inside him had gone quiet. Not peace, but exhaustion at a level he had never known existed. When asked if he wished to speak in his own defense, Daniel hesitated for the first time since all this began. Words gathered in his chest and died before reaching his mouth. What defense could survive a world that had already chosen its truth? The judge watched him calmly, waiting, unaware that a man was collapsing invisibly right in front of her. For a brief moment, Daniel considered surrendering completely, signing whatever they gave him, accepting the sentence, letting the world forget his name. The idea terrified him, but it also offered rest. No more running, no more fighting shadows he could never clearly see in his mind. He saw Lucy's face one last time as she had looked during their final supervised visit. The way she trusted him completely. The way she believed he would fix everything. That memory cut deeper than any chain around his wrists. The judge postponed the final ruling, citing procedural delays. The word delay landed like a cruel joke. It was not hope, it was a slower execution. Daniel was returned to his cell with the terrible awareness that time was no longer neutral. Time itself had become his enemy. That night, alone in the dark, Daniel whispered to the ceiling that he was tired. Not just physically, but tired of believing in strength that only seemed to invite more pain. His voice cracked the way stone cracks under endless pressure. For the first time in his life, Daniel allowed the thought to surface clearly. Maybe Lucy would be better without me. The instant the thought formed, it nearly destroyed him. But it also revealed how broken he had become. And in that silent cell, with surrender brushing against his soul, Daniel stood on the edge between disappearing forever or finding one last reason to stand back up. Hope returned not as a miracle, but as something small, fragile, and almost invisible. During morning inmate work duty, Daniel dropped a stack of cleaning supplies by accident, earning impatient looks from guards and other prisoners. As he knelt to gather them, an elderly inmate quietly helped him without a word. The old man slipped something into Daniel's palm while no one was watching. A folded piece of paper no larger than a matchbook. Daniel looked at him in confusion, but the man only whispered, "You're not alone in here," and shuffled away slowly. Back in his cell, Daniel unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. Asterisk, she never stopped trying to save you. There was no name, no explanation, no context. But Daniel knew instantly who she was. His heart pounded with a feeling he hadn't felt in weeks, fear mixed with possibility. If Claire was still trying, then perhaps he had not been abandoned as completely as he believed. The silence from Margaret suddenly felt less like disappearance and more like concealment. That afternoon, Daniel was unexpectedly allowed to make a single monitored phone call. The guard didn't explain why. On impulse alone, Daniel dialed the prepaid number Margaret had given him long ago. It rang once. Margaret answered with only one sentence. "You were never supposed to break this early." Then she hung up. But the message was clear. Something was moving again, and it involved him. That night, Daniel sat upright on his bunk, unable to sleep for the first time in weeks. Not because of despair, but because of anticipation ***. The darkness no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a hiding place for something that hadn't revealed itself yet. And for the first time since everything collapsed, Daniel felt a dangerous, disobedient thought rise inside him again. Maybe this isn't over. 2 days later, a new inmate was placed in Daniel's cell block. A man in his early 40s with expensive posture ***, trying to hide behind prison-issued clothing. He avoided others, spoke rarely, and observed everything with unsettling precision. When his eyes met Daniel's for the first time, something passed between them that needed no words. That night, as guards changed shifts and the noise of the block dimmed, the man whispered from the shadows, "You don't know what kind of war you walked into when you helped her." The voice was steady, informed, and absolutely certain. Daniel remained silent, but every nerve in his body was alert. The man continued, explaining that Claire was connected to one of the most aggressively hidden corporate power struggles in the Western United States. Shell companies, financial warfare, inheritance battles disguised as hostile takeovers. Daniel receives a bombshell from a mysterious inmate. He wasn't framed by accident. The entire setup was a message to Claire. This is what happens to anyone who helps you. The man reveals he once worked for the corporation, falsifying digital identities, exactly like they did to Daniel. He's in prison because he hesitated once. And hesitation is treated as betrayal at that level of power. The final phrase freezes Daniel's blood. Claire isn't just running from people. She's running from being crowned. The woman he saved from the rain wasn't just a fugitive. She was the center of an empire. Every detail clicks into place. Claire's collapse, the men arriving instantly, the perfect timing of accusations. Daniel realizes his act of kindness might have been predicted. His suffering was calculated. Lucy's tears were collateral damage. Guards start acting strange, avoiding his eyes, watching him with caution. Margaret sends a cryptic message. "You were chosen by circumstance, but now you're being evaluated by consequence." His survival itself might now be seen as defiance. Desperate to know if Lucy is safe, Daniel breaks every rule Margaret gave him. He sends a simple email, "Daddy loves you. I'm fighting to come back to you." Less than 1 hour later, his phone is confiscated. His cell is torn apart. That same night, the mysterious inmate who warned him is violently removed. By morning, it's like he never existed. Margaret goes silent. The case escalates to federal jurisdiction. New sealed evidence appears. So classified even his lawyer can't see it. One message of love made everything catastrophically worse. His lawyer arrives with a smile and a way out. Plead guilty to reduced charges. get witness protection, limited contact with Lucy. Daniel will survive as a convicted criminal. Then comes the final condition. You must confirm under oath that Claire manipulated you into all of it. The room goes silent. The deal isn't about justice. It's about rewriting truth permanently. By accusing Claire, Daniel would mark her for absolute destruction. The lawyer leans closer. If you refuse, the offer disappears, and so does any chance of seeing your daughter before she becomes an adult. Choose who gets destroyed so the other can live. Daniel doesn't eat, doesn't sleep. He replays Lucy's laugh, remembering when she asked if heroes ever got tired. During roll call, he drops to his knees, not from physical weakness, but from unbearable emotional pressure. In the infirmary, he weeps openly for the first time. His body shakes violently. For hours, his mind spirals. He blames himself for stopping the truck, for trusting, for hoping, for loving Lucy more than his own freedom. By evening, the anger evaporates. Fear dulls. Even hope dissolves. Inside him, only a quiet, dead vacuum remains. This was the lowest point, but somehow it still didn't feel like the end. Margaret stops sending messages. His lawyer stops returning calls. Media interest dies overnight, erased with an invisible hand. Fellow inmates avoid conversation. Association with him became statistically dangerous. Daniel tries writing letters. Lucy's school, social services, old co-workers. Every attempt dissolves into silence. People could hate him, that still meant he existed. But indifference was erasure, and erasure felt closer to death than any sentence. One morning, Daniel wakes up realizing there's no one left to reach for. He whispers Lucy's name into the darkness. No answer comes back. But when a man realizes he truly has nothing left to lose, he becomes capable of facing forces he once believed were untouchable. The change arrives like a breath after holding air underwater. Guards linger an extra second at his cell. One slips extra bread onto his tray, pretending it's an error. For the first time in weeks, Daniel dreams again. Not of fear, but of motion. Roads. Lucy running. Himself standing instead of falling. He finds a folded note under his mattress. You were never abandoned. Dr. Elaine Porter arrives as a prison therapist. Halfway through the session, she asks something no report requires. Who do you trust in this world right now, Daniel? Daniel answers honestly, no one. Elaine's silence feels deliberate. As she leaves, she whispers, sometimes people think silence means safety. It rarely does. 2 days later, she slips him a phone number. That night, she calls, you're not erased. You're buried under layered misdirection. She reveals his case file was intentionally fragmented across jurisdictions, a maneuver that only happens when multiple corporate interests are coordinating behind the scenes. A minor clerk in New York notices irregular transactions connected to Claire's collapse date. Within days, fragments migrate through encrypted networks. Elaine calls, voice trembling. The woman you helped was never a victim of random collapse. She was in the middle of a corporate assassination. Claire was strategically isolated during a leadership dispute involving billions of dollars. Daniel unknowingly interrupted a flawless execution. The empire she stood to inherit. Defense contracts, biotech patents, international logistics. The kind of power that doesn't lose quietly, by saving her life. Daniel stepped directly into the crossfire of an empire at war. Elaine sends a coded message. Your wife's accident was never random either. Daniel's hands tremble as forgotten details resurface. Missing camera footage, rushed police report, a truck never identified. Sealed documents reveal the defendant corporation was a subsidiary of the same empire Claire was meant to inherit. Lucy's medical bills had been mysteriously covered by an anonymous foundation. At the time, mercy. Now, hush money disguised as charity. His life had been circling this empire long before he ever stopped his truck that night. Lucy has been located in a high-security private care facility funded by anonymous corporate donors. She wasn't being protected. She was being leveraged. The offer: sign the plea agreement and testify against Claire. Lucy gets elite education, healthcare, a guaranteed future. Refuse. The funding expires naturally. Daniel imagines Lucy at 20, learning who her father truly was. A man who traded justice for comfort, or a man who stood alone so she wouldn't inherit a lie. His voice steady, "I won't sign. They will punish you through her." The lawyer warns. Daniel nods. "They already have. I won't destroy the only person who tried to save me." 3 days after Daniel's refusal, his transfer order is frozen without explanation. For the first time, the Empire's machine hesitates. Elaine calls. "Someone just blocked a federal acceleration clause. That shouldn't be possible, but it happened." Daniel is moved out of solitary. His appeal is suddenly accepted for reconsideration. One of his frozen accounts is quietly unfrozen. A dormant insurance policy from his late wife reactivates after a decade. The first tool Daniel has possessed since his fall. He hires an independent forensic auditor. Within days, patterns emerge: shell accounts, manipulated foreclosures, all linked to companies circling Claire's empire. For the first time, Daniel possesses the means to strike back. A classified file is decrypted. Claire is the primary successor of Carrington Global Holdings, an empire controlling defense manufacturing, pharmaceutical infrastructure, and international shipping across 3 continents. Her collapse wasn't an assassination. It was the opening maneuver in a corporate coup designed to discredit her before transferring assets permanently. She was drugged with a substance causing temporary neurological shutdown, engineered to mimic a random fainting episode. Every accusation against Daniel served one purpose: isolate the only civilian witness who could confirm the method used against her. Saving her life had challenged the succession of an empire built on blood-quiet contracts. Daniel's legal team releases evidence to 3 independent journalists simultaneously, documents proving Claire was drugged and that assets moved within minutes of her collapse. The media explosion is instant. Within 24 hours, federal investigators raid 2 Carrington subsidiaries. Employees detained, servers seized, arrests at executive levels. The empire no longer controls the story alone. Protected by federal marshals, Claire appears at a congressional emergency hearing. Her testimony is precise, controlled, devastating. She names names, releases transactions, displays medical files, and confirms publicly that Daniel saved her life without ever knowing who she was. Claire activates a succession override clause, transferring controlling interest of Carrington Global directly to her. Within hours, billions shift. Entire power structures collapse. She orders a restitution fund using seized assets, its first beneficiary, Daniel and his daughter. The compensation is historic. Overnight, Daniel goes from absolute ruin to multimillionaire status. Lucy's care facility is upgraded. Her future secured. Her file marked with one word: protected. Daniel is released at dawn. No cameras. No speeches. Just cold morning air touching his face. Lucy runs into his arms. Her hair longer. Her voice stronger. Claire watches from a distance. Eyes heavy with years of silence finally released. Daniel never seeks fame. His wealth becomes invisible, directed into schools, shelters, road safety programs, single-parent support foundations. One evening, Daniel visits the same stretch of road where everything changed. Claire stands beside him. That night changed the course of 2 empires. Daniel replies quietly, "No, it just proved that doing the right thing still matters." As father and daughter drive away together, one final truth remains. Kindness had not only saved a life, it had rewritten destinies forever. 3 days after Daniel's refusal, the Empire's machine hesitates for the first time. His transfer freezes. His appeal is suddenly accepted. A frozen account unlocks. Dr. Elaine Porter, a prison therapist, becomes his hidden ally. She reveals the truth. Claire isn't a victim. She's the heir to Carrington Global Holdings, an empire worth billions. Her collapse was a corporate coup, not an accident. Even Daniel's wife's death years ago was connected to the same empire. His life had been circling this war long before he stopped his truck. Daniel's legal team releases evidence to journalists. The media explodes. Federal raids hit Carrington's subsidiaries. Arrests at executive levels. Claire emerges publicly, testifies before Congress, and activates a succession clause, taking control of the empire. She creates a restitution fund. Daniel and Lucy are the first beneficiaries. Daniel is released at dawn. Lucy runs into his arms, her hair longer, her voice stronger. His wealth goes quietly to schools, shelters, and single-parent foundations. One evening, he visits the same road where it all began. Claire stands beside him. That night changed two empires. Daniel replies, "No, it just proved that doing the right thing still matters." Kindness had not only saved a life, it had rewritten destinies forever.